All right, this is my presentation on Joseph Marie Charles. Before we get into the presentation, I will give a quick explanation of how this is going to go. Basically, I have some background information on Joseph, and then I go into what he made and then how his invention correlates to the field of computer science. So moving on and getting into it, basically, he played a very important role in the development of the earliest programmable loom. You will see what that is at the end, and I will go have an explanation for that. But for now, that's all you really need to know. He was born on July 7th, 1752 in France. He also goes by the name of Jacquard. That is important, but we'll also see that later on. He was one of 9 children. Only him and his sister survived till adulthood. His father was a master weaver, which I will go into on the next slide, and he received no formal schooling and was illiterate until he was 13. I included this just because I think that's interesting, considering he would play such a huge role in the field of computer science. So basically what a master weaver was, they were people who operated on a loom, which you could see in the photo to the right. This is a machine that will produce fabrics, textiles, or other types of woven products by interweaving threads at just the right angle. These master weavers would learn this craft through apprenticeships and working with other people. Obviously, not all fabric was used or created through a loom, but it just helped with the process. So moving on, he was taught by his brother-in-law who ran a printing business. This is important because then he became not illiterate, which is important. So around 1770, both of his parents died, and he inherited his father's house, looms, workshop, and vineyard. After this, he then dabbled in some real estate and other forms of work. On July 26th, 1778, he married Claudine. She was a middle-class widow who owned some property and had a substantial dowry. On the next slide, I have an explanation of dowry because at first I didn't quite know what this meant. So a dowry is property or money brought by a bride to her husband on their marriage. So just figured I'd include that. And not too long after their marriage, Joseph would fall into a deep debt. This is because he started a figure weaving business after his father died, and that eventually failed, and he lost all of his money. To settle these debts, he sold all of his inheritance and had to appropriate his wife's dowry. 1 year later, they had their first and only child, and it was a son named Jean Marie. After the rebellion in Lyon in 1773, him and his son escaped from the city, and they had joined the Revolutionary Army. They fought together in the Rhine campaign of 1795, and his son was killed just right outside of Heidelberg, which is kind of sad, but obviously he moved on, and by the 1800s, he started inventing various devices. In 1800, he made a treadle loom. In 1803, he made a loom that would weave fishing nets, and also in 1803, he was summoned to Paris, where he would find a loom on display that would then perfect his own loom. In 1804, he worked on the Jacquard loom, and this would weave fabric automatically. In 1805, the loom was declared a public property, and Jacquard was rewarded with a pension and royalty on each machine, which obviously is huge. That probably brought in a lot of revenue for him. Obviously, because of this invention, a lot of silk weavers didn't like it because they feared that it would put them out of a job, which is very valid as well because a lot of people worked on these looms. At first, the sales were rough because of problems with the punch card mechanism, which we will see. After 1815, the problem was solved and loom sales would increase after this. Later on, he died August 7th, 1834, and then 6 years later, a statue was erected for him in Lyon, where he was born. Going into the loom itself, how the loom worked. So you remember the photo from the first slide, or the second slide, I should say. Instead of the weaver having to make the pattern, Joseph designed a system that would sit above the loom and would do this for him. He would use a series of punch cards that would either allow the thread to be selected or not to be selected. This would then apply the pattern without any user error. To switch from card to card, there would be a lever underneath the user. They would push down on this and release. This would then cause the system to move on to the next card, continuing the pattern. If they were to have a cycle of certain cards, this would create a very complex pattern. The overall speed of the loom before the loom, when silk weavers would have to do this by hand, they could only produce 1 inch of fabric in a day. And with the introduction of the loom, 2 feet of the same fabric would be able to be created in a day, which is obviously a very quick turnaround compared to the 1 inch. And then how does this loom correlate to computer science? So overall, the loom's punch card mechanism would later inspire a mathematician and engineer named Charles Babbage. He would rethink the process of creating mathematical tables. These tables were needed in the fields of navigation, science, and engineering. These at the time were calculated by hand. He would then create a machine that was recognized as one of the first computers, the analytical machine. The analytical engine would then perform any calculation that was put in front of it. The engine had 4 main components. These consist of the mill, the store, the reader, and the printer. The mill was the calculating unit. In modern-day computers, this would be the CPU. The store was where the data was held prior to processing. This is like memory or RAM in modern-day computers. And the reader and printer is just an input and output device. The store was able to handle up to 1,050 digit numbers, and the machine was steam-driven and usually ran by 1 attendant. The reader used punch cards to read input data. Instructions were also entered in on the cards. The system was just like the Jacquard system that came before it. So now I will display some images so you can see what I'm talking about. Here are the punch cards. As you can see, there's a series of holes and not holes. These would either let the needle go through the hole or not through the hole, thus selecting either the fabric or the number that it displayed. And you could see the needles right here, and this square-like looking formation that when it turned, it would roll over and the next card would be put into place, ready for selection. Here is the Jacquard loom in action. You can see the needle below, or not the needle, the lever below that is connected up top, which would move the punch cards to the left onto the next card and then onto the next card, and this would then produce the pattern in the fabric. This is a picture of the analytical machine, steam-driven, and it looks very industrial, I guess you could say. So this was the actual machine that would do all the computations. And that is it. Thank you for listening and watching. I appreciate it. And then I guess I just have some citations as well. So thank you.